Hey friends, it's Ryland Rainsford with Rainsford Photography, and on this channel we are all about building confidence for the creative entrepreneur. And so today we're going to be talking about a little bit less of a tangible topic, but one of the most meaningful and important ones, self-knowledge. So have you ever felt like you're just going into work day in, day out, you're not really sure if you are passionate about what you're doing, you have some good days, you have some good bad days, but you're just not really sure where you're going. You don't really know what you want to be when you grow up. You're not really sure what you're good at, what you're passionate about, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. Well, for me, I was right there. And it really, what it boiled down to is that I just did not have a lot of clarity about myself. I did not have much self-knowledge. Well, today I'm going to be talking with Dr. Will Gray. He is a serial entrepreneur, has started and owns several businesses, but one of them is called Vocationality, where he helps guide people through this process of bringing clarity to themselves and to their own lives. Because the truth is that we are all made with a unique story. We all have a unique set of experiences, of ups and downs, that help shape and define what our passions and our strengths, and just what our core is. And all of us, because that's unique, should uniquely capitalize on our story to bring the most value to the world, but especially in our businesses. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to grow in clarity about yourself so that you can bring the most value to not only your clients, but also to your community, to your family, and to society at large. So I hope you find this as insightful and meaningful as it has been for me. And so let's dive right in. So again, man, thank you so much for being here, Will. I have been looking forward to this since we first spoke about it, and I'm really, really excited to be doing this now today. Thanks for your time.
It's my pleasure, Rylan. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Ever since I went through your vocationality program last year, that just taught me so much about
Mm.
myself, which was just an area that I hadn't really invested a whole lot of time or energy in before. Um, and the premise that we all have a story and that the Lord has given us all that unique story for a reason, and with that story, unique passions and strengths that we can steward for His glory in specific ways, just was so freeing and empowering to
Wow.
know that there are certain things that I should be focusing on and prioritizing, because that's where I can bring the most value, like steward the gifts that He's given me to their greatest extent. I had previously felt like I should just be a jack of all trades and just kind of
Mm.
try to be everything to everyone. And um, yeah, and that was just like crushing all the time. And so going through this with you was so freeing, and empowering to realize that no, there are a few things that I really should focus and prioritize on to really be as effective as possible, and to steward my gifts to their greatest extent, to the Lord's glory in both community and in society. So, and with my family, most probably first and foremost.
Mm.
So I'm really, really excited to share some of these same ideas that were so meaningful to me with some of the people that are listening to this.
Yeah.
The people that we've been working with, we just a little bit more context. We did a in-person workshop on bringing more structure to your business at the beginning of the year, and we did kind of a brief run through of this topic, and everybody was just really moved, and
Mm.
um, there were a lot of paradigm shifts that happened and a lot of
Yes.
clarity that came even from just dabbling in this for 30 minutes
Wow.
and giving some people some questions to reflect on and think about. So I'm really, really excited to dive in
Mm.
with the expert today. So maybe to kick us off, we I just wanted to kind of hear from you, like why is self knowledge such an important
thing both in our personal lives and in our businesses. So I guess I feel like it's something we don't really talk about very often. So just kind of like
No, we
in that
don't.
for us.
You're right. I think I shared with you that this topic is so challenging now, I think in most developed parts of the world, in part because we're so distant from one another. And I know this is it's apropos today because during coronavirus we could be in the same room, but not
Yeah.
in the season right now.
Right.
And I suspect, I don't know this, obviously you can't prove it, but I suspect a couple hundred years ago, in most parts of the world, when families were closer and maybe
Yeah.
you were more likely to see people who had known you for decades, we probably had a better sense of ourselves.
Mm.
But because we're so separate now, I think this is one of the challenges. I like, you know, I like many aspects of living in my own house rather than
Yeah.
my parents' house.
Yeah.
But the reality is, we wake up some days, I think, particularly in our work, and we think, boy, I am really burned out.
Mm.
Or I used to enjoy this and now I hate it, or
Mm.
whatever it is. And we
Mhm.
don't know where that comes from.
Mhm.
And so I became interested in this many years ago. And as I shared with you, this first came out as I was teaching at Clemson a little over a decade ago
Wow.
and
Yeah.
helping juniors and seniors identify how to go about finding a job.
Mm.
And I was convinced they already knew the right field to move into. They just needed help in expressing themselves.
Mm.
And uh, everything I had been taught about finding a job was really not that helpful. What was in the textbooks seemed like a fill in the blank exercise,
Mm.
uh, which sounds nice if that's all you need to do, but
Yeah.
that's not that helpful either.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just felt instinctively that what they needed was how to understand what's distinct about them.
Yeah.
What's different. I didn't even have all the language for it at that point. But more and more over the last decade, I found that the reason that people either thrive in their work and do their best work and are able to really serve others effectively in ways that sometimes doesn't even feel like work,
Mm.
or on the other extreme, the reason that people get burned out or accidentally get promoted into something they're not great at,
Mm.
or when they're leading a business, the one of the main reasons it can feel so frustrating is that you don't understand yourself well enough. You
Yeah.
don't understand who you are, and so you don't understand as a result how you're showing up to work or not showing up to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. So you mentioned earlier that it was you think that this maybe wasn't so much of a problem maybe a few generations ago. Kind of flesh
Yeah.
that out a little bit more for me. Why do you think that?
Sure. Well, you could probably imagine living with your parents and your aunts and uncles, and Grandma Susie or whatever is going on in your life. I think that kind of thing was much more common back then.
Yeah.
And so, if you had all those people around you all the time, you're probably a lot more likely to be getting feedback. And we'll actually return to this
Mm.
because
Yeah.
this is really important. Sometimes this is hard to do for yourself. It's helpful
Yeah.
to hear Grandma Susie say, Rylan, you are so good at such and such. And you either think when she says that, oh, yeah, I guess so. Or you think, really? I don't see
Yeah.
that at all, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of feedback, I think, was probably more natural just from people living together.
Mm. More prevalent.
Now, our lives are separate, and we don't do what Bonhoeffer would call life together
Mhm.
as often. And
Mhm.
so there's not as much perspective that others have on your life to begin with.
Mm.
And there's not as much togetherness for people to give you that kind of feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, the solution here is not that we all live in communes or anything like that. I think
Right.
there are ways of learning about yourself even while living in your
Yeah. So it sounds like what we're really have come to kind of lose or are lacking in a lot of instances is just clarity about
yes,
ourselves.
that's
Yeah.
right.
Is there a helpful maybe analogy of that to help kind of solidify this for people?
I feel like that was a little soft pitch. Thank you. We actually talked quite a lot about clarity, um, and clarity means light.
Mm.
You can see in the window behind me, it's a clear day out, which means there's a lot of light. And clarity really works the same way. When we hit a place in our lives where we're not sure how to move forward, or we're confused, or we feel like we're in fog.
Mm.
There are a lot of these analogies that are weather related that we might use.
Yeah.
And one of the main challenges is that we've lost clarity. Things used to be clear of how to move forward, or how to be ourselves, or how to do our work in a way that brought value to others, but also joy to us. We
Mm.
lost that, and so clarity really works like light in that way. When we discover new things about ourselves and new things about the way we do our best work, it functions a lot like light, and
Mm.
we can see things that we couldn't see before, and we can do things that we weren't able to do before. And so
Yeah.
the analogy that we come back to toward the end of the vocationality pathway, for instance, is driving at night. If you've ever driven at night and you had a headlight, even one headlight go out,
Yeah.
it's a little unnerving.
Yeah.
Or maybe you realize you've been driving and you forgot to turn your headlights on,
For
and
sure.
you thought, I wondered why I felt so nervous.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
makes a whole lot more sense.
Yeah.
So the goal is to be able to feel like you can move forward, have momentum in your
Mm.
work life, and in order to do that, you need enough clarity to move forward safely.
Yeah. Man, so okay, so that's really helpful. Such a helpful analogy of like why clarity about ourselves is so important.
Mm.
Um, when I first started thinking about this, I thought that it was really like it was all going to be about me and for me.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
who is I learned that's not really true. Who do you think
Yeah.
that this is really for? Like all this clarity. Why should we pursue
Yeah.
clarity, and for whom?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, it's not just for you. It is for you, of course, because you're the only person you get to captain, as it
Yeah.
were, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not responsible for anyone else's decisions and
Mm.
reactions and words and things like that. So it is for you, and that's good. But really, it's going to help everyone that you come into contact with now.
Mm.
And this is easier to see when you think about someone else rather than yourself,
Yeah.
right? So if you think about someone else, in fact, let's think about two different people in
Okay.
your life.
Yeah.
And people watching this, feel free to think of specific people and specific names.
Yeah.
Somebody who really knows themselves well, and somebody who doesn't really know themselves well at all. Right? You probably can imagine the difference in those people.
Mm.
And you can answer questions like, who is more fun to be around? Who do you have better conversations with?
So true.
Who would you like to go on a trip with? Who would you like to work with? Even,
Yeah.
right? And so when you're thinking about somebody else, all of that becomes much clearer, and you think,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that person who doesn't know themselves very well, they're constantly changing jobs. They have self-doubt all the time.
Mm.
When we try to do something together, they really aren't sure how to do it. They haven't worked at anything long enough, maybe, to really build that up. There are lots of directions this could go, but everyone is going to be helped around you if you understand who you're made to be. And
Yeah.
that's really the language I think is really helpful for you to think about.
Yeah.
Who are you made to be? Because
Mm.
you didn't just happen. I don't
Right.
know what your worldview is, those of you who are
Right.
listening, but uh, um, we talk about fingerprint and your iris and your DNA
Yeah.
being distinct. And in fact, they're just radically distinct. But
Mm.
there's so many other things about you that are also radically distinct. And a
Mm.
lot of those have to do with your work and
Mm.
your personality and how you interact with other people. And when you get a sense of that, wow, you're actually able to show up as yourself, maybe for the first time in your life. And other people are the real beneficiaries of that as a result. Your customers, your coworkers.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So we've kind of drawn this connection now between like, okay, our story is unique and our
Yes.
story is important, but what role does our story play in all of this? How is
Mhm.
that connected? We know that
Yes.
we've established that it is, but like, tell me a little bit more about how.
Okay. Yeah. So your story is one more of those aspects of you that no one else has. No one
Yeah.
has your fingerprint,
Mm.
but also no one has your story, and no one ever will.
Mm.
It's yours.
Mm.
And you might think of your story, and you may not even call it your story. You may just think of it as things that happened, right?
Yeah.
But it's actually a lot more meaningful than that. And the
Yeah.
reality is, if you want to, you can always be helping to co-write your story as you move forward. You, as I mentioned earlier, you have some agency over your life.
So,
So
yeah.
you can determine to some extent how you're going to show up every day.
Yeah.
and how you're going to interact with other people. And there's so much in your story that already reveals who you are and who you're made to be.
Hmm.
Uh, there are, if you look back over it, and this could be a fun little project for you or to tell to someone else, you can pick up on things like the most significant moments in your life that have really shaped you into the person who you are now. What you love and maybe where that started,
Mm-hmm.
what you hate the most, and how you learned that,
Yeah.
how you make decisions, who you look to for guidance. All of these kinds of things are unique aspects of your story, and they're really crucial to understanding who you are and who you're made to be because you're not living anyone else's story. You're
Mm.
living in your story. And so it would be nice for you to be aware of that, so that you can participate in that on purpose.
Man, going through your vocationality program was the first time I'd ever told the 2.5 hour version of my story.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Like I felt like it was old news, and yet going back through it in so much detail and to such kind of like really digging through it again with my hands and my mind, like revealed so many things that I just never that were there, that were right there,
Yes.
but I'd never
Yes.
acknowledged before. And that was man, that was so eye opening and
Mm.
so encouraging, and just clarifying to see that all these things while I was in that period, like you said, like not knowing myself, of self doubt,
Yes.
and confusion, it was so clarifying to and built so much confidence in me looking
Mm.
back and seeing that like these things are a part of my story and they've been here the
Yes.
whole time. Like,
Yes.
why have I
Yes.
just like missed them this whole time? And
Right.
so that kind of gets into my next question of like, why is it so hard for
Mm.
us to kind of come to know ourselves? I feel like it's relatively easy to come to know somebody else. I mean, you could maybe not. That's complicated. That's a loaded statement. Um, but it's why is it more difficult, I feel like, for us to come to know ourselves than to maybe come to know someone else?
Yeah, that's good. Great question. Two big reasons,
Yeah.
and each of these I'll share a little uh, example, to highlight a little bit. One is that it's just really hard to have perspective on yourself.
Mm.
I mean, I compare it to trying to look at your own back, right? Um,
It's about
that's not easy to do, even in a mirror. You
yeah,
think, really? Is that
yeah,
what the back of my head looks like? Huh?
yeah.
And I'm reminded of this poem by Robert Burns, who was this Scottish poet from a long time
Mhm.
ago.
Yeah.
If you've ever heard of "My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose," he wrote that poem.
Okay, yes.
Well, he wrote another poem called "To a Louse," like a louse, like lice.
Yeah.
And the setting is he's at church and he's trying to pay attention to the sermon, but there's a bug crawling all over the back of the woman in front of him, and she has no idea it's there, and he thinks it's hilarious. And so he closes the poem. And I'm going to paraphrase here because his language is quite old and Scots as well. But
Yeah.
he says, wouldn't it be great if we could see ourselves the way that other people see us? It would keep us from getting into so much trouble. And the reality is, it is so hard to see ourselves clearly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and as I mentioned earlier with the Grandma Susie analogy, sometimes when people tell us things about ourselves, we think, really? Is that true? And it may not be that they're completely right, but we can't see ourselves the way that other people see us. And I think that's a big barrier.
Mm.
The other challenge, though, is I think the challenge of being so submerged in our own story. That's
Yeah.
wonderful to a certain extent,
Yeah.
but that also means that that really we kind of look at ourselves differently than we look at other people, and
Mhm.
it's not just a matter of perspective. I may have shared this quotation with you from Albert Einstein. He said, "Everybody is a genius, but if
Mhm.
you tell a fish that it's stupid because it can't climb a tree, it will spend the rest of its life believing you."
Mm.
And so there's this dynamic of perspective, but there's also this dynamic that we kind of don't give ourselves the same permission to describe ourselves as we do for other people
Yeah. Yeah.
in a way, right?
Yeah.
We just think maybe there's something wrong with us, or maybe on our best days, there's something really amazing about us.
Yeah.
And so we kind of treat ourselves as the major character sometimes
Yeah.
in the story, where of course we're not the major character in the story. And if we're burned out from trying to do our work, we don't ever think about it like, you know what? I'm like a fish trying to climb a tree. I
Mm,
maybe have completely different
mm,
features here that
mhm,
I've been designed with, and
mm.
I'm using the wrong features.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where when we look at somebody else, we not only have perspective, but we kind of give ourselves that permission to describe someone that way too.
Mm, mm. So I know that our story is a big part of kind of gaining that perspective on ourselves, but it sounds like not just telling our stories, but also like getting other people's perspective on our stories. Is that you feel like that's kind of a necessity in this?
I I do. I didn't always feel that way. Vocationality began about 10 years ago, and it's gone
Yeah.
through lots of iterations because
Yeah.
I like to learn along the way,
Yeah.
see how I can improve it.
Yeah.
Story has only been central for the last few years,
Mm,
and that's I'm so grateful myself to have learned that.
mm,
Um, and I do want to encourage you watching this. If you don't have someone in your life that you trust to give you feedback, I hope you do. I hope you have many people.
mhm.
Or if you don't have the time to get this kind of help or money right now, you can do some of this work for yourself.
Right.
But there is something really irreplaceable about including the perspective of
Yeah.
others.
Yeah.
Um, and in fact, giving them questions that are easy for them to answer. So this is important as well. I sometimes talk about the hot mess that we can give other people. Sometimes when we feel lost in our life or our work, and we show up to an old friend and say, "You know me, Ryland. What do
Yeah.
you think I should be doing with my life?" And when you think about it that way, how are you possibly going to answer that question?
Yeah.
You have not been preparing this document to give me my pathway.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're saying, "Oh, finally you approached me and asked me this question. Now I can finally give you the plan." But
Mm,
including other people, I think, is really important, because they bring that perspective, and because I think there are dynamics sometimes like, you know what, you don't really notice this about yourself, but this
yeah.
is really important,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think you need to actually give it the value that it deserves.
Yeah.
This might be what we call super strengths in vocationality, which are not, is we didn't create that term. That's from the researcher Whitney Johnson. But these are not the strengths that are so obvious to you that you've designed your superhero costume around them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Super strengths are actually things that come so easily to you that you forget they're hard for other people.
Mm,
And this is just one kind of example where other people's perspective is so valuable
mm,
to be able to see who we actually are and who we're designed to be in
mm,
ways that are useful to other people or in
mm,
ways that other people understand.
mm. Man, that was one of the most challenging, but also most valuable parts of going through
Mm,
the vocationality program with you was not only digesting all of this with you personally, but also reaching out to a few of my closest friends and my
yeah.
spouse and like
Yes.
asking some of these questions of them.
Uh-huh.
And I was tempted to be, terrified of the feedback, but it was so helpful and so encouraging and so important. That was such a critical step.
Um,
So, just to quickly summarize the vocationality program, kind of summarize the vocationality program for us. It sounds like it starts with story, but kind of where does it go
right.
from there, and how does it conclude?
So it is a defined pathway, and
Okay.
that's intentional because a lot of career coaching is so open-ended that after 15 conversations, you might still wonder whether you
Yeah.
have enough, right? And
Right.
that's not a real gift
Right.
to have at that point. So
Right.
this is a defined pathway, 5 conversations and about 10 hours of online exercises that you do
Mhm.
during the program. And each conversation is designed to accomplish something together. Um, Between you and the guide. And I happen to be the guide in the situation. There are several other guides in
Yep.
vocationality too from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And so that first conversation is all about your story. And as Rylan mentioned, as you mentioned just a moment ago, we spent about 2 hours just hearing your story. For
Yeah.
most people, they've never had that kind of time. And in fact, many people say, "Oh, it's definitely not going to take 2 hours." You know what? It does.
It does.
The second conversation in fact, the second, third, and fourth are all about standing on the shoulders of your story now. In other
Mm.
words, trying to work from the best understanding of who you are,
Love that
not just
terminology.
vague sense, but just really working from the best potential that we've learned about you
Yeah.
to identify three powerful kinds of clarity. We've already talked about clarity, how important that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And those are your calling, your gifts, and your fit. And
Okay.
calling is that deep way that you resonate with the world. It's almost like if you look back in your story and you think, when did I feel most like myself?
Yeah.
Or when did I feel that deep sense of, I really feel connected to what I'm meant to do?
Mm.
Maybe I couldn't verbalize it back then, but we're going to verbalize it,
Mm.
maybe for the first time.
Mm.
Your gifts may be more obvious. What are your features? Back to that Einstein quote. Do you have fins and can breathe underwater,
Yeah.
or are you really good at climbing trees and
Right.
love bananas? Right.
Right.
And there are lots of other options too. But we're trying to listen to the ones that are most distinct, so that you can actually work from your design most effectively. Not generically, like I'm good with technology. We're going to try to really find the personal aspect of this so that you can be yourself even in how you're showing up. And then the final kind of clarity is called fit. And
Mm.
these are the dynamics of your work that sometimes can feel like they happen by accident,
Mm.
but they also shape your experience and how you're able to show up. Sometimes your work can stifle you. And it might
Yeah.
be the kind of boss you work under, or the job description you've given yourself if you run your own business, the
Mhm.
environment you work in, the roles you're playing, how much you're around people. All of those kinds of things can either stifle you or help you do your best work.
I think we've
So
all
that's what
experienced that.
capturing too,
Yeah.
for sure. And in that final conversation, we're aiming all of that clarity
Yeah.
at the exact place in your story where you are right now, so
Mm.
that you can begin writing the next chapter and the next chapters in the light of that new clarity and drive with the clarity on.
Mm.
Just like you might drive at night now with your headlights on,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
goal of your headlights now is not to stretch all the way to your final destination or to the end
Yeah.
of your life.
Mm.
Headlights don't work that way,
Mm.
but they allow you now to drive proactively
Yeah.
and start showing up to your life on purpose and
Yeah.
with more
Yeah.
agency rather than just allowing your work to happen to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, we have been so convicted recently that whether it's by setting goals or by working at growing in clarity about ourselves,
Mm,
that achievement, like you said, arrival at the destination is not really the ultimate end or
mm,
the ultimate purpose of those headlights. It's for us to be able to like keep driving, to keep
right.
moving, and to keep being proactive, and taking agency over our lives, so that we can just keep moving, like keep growing in the Lord, keep growing in community and society and with our families, with our friends, etc.
Yes.
And I love that analogy, like you said, of standing on the shoulders of our own lives. That's why
Mhm.
that is one of the things that has stuck with me the most,
Mm,
about the value of learning about ourselves and really digging into my own story. That was extremely, extremely helpful.
oh, I'm so glad.
So, for a lot of people who may be listening, they may either not be here in Greenville or they may not have the means or the time to go through the full vocationality program right now. But what are some, like, either some questions for people to ponder or some things that people can start doing immediately to kind of start thinking in this direction,
Yeah.
or start growing their clarity in themselves?
Mhm. So first of all, we do in vocationality work with people all over the world,
Great. Okay.
and we work remotely. So I
Awesome.
don't normally have a microphone like this poking into the frame, but in fact, this afternoon I'm going to be working with a client based in Durham, North Carolina.
Perfect.
Um, so that's an option, and if price is a barrier, we also have an option where people can pay monthly over a year.
Great.
So just to throw that out there, but
Cool.
it may not be the right time, or this may not be the right thing for you to
Yeah.
invest in, and that's
Yeah.
great too. But there are lots of ways that you can start to do this for yourself. And I think the biggest thing I'd recommend to you is that you just start listening to your life.
Mm.
That's a line that I stole quite gladly from Frederick Buechner several years ago. We use that in vocationality a lot. He's a writer and pastor. If you're not familiar with his work, I'd highly recommend it to you.
Right.
His last name is Buechner, Buchner.
Right.
And listening to your life, I think, is just paying attention to yourself like you might pay attention to someone else you care about. This is not an act of self-love in a harmful or obsessive way. It's
Right.
just paying attention. Just
Right.
paying attention. It's paying attention to things as simple as, I had a great day today.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, what was going on today that was so great,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So that maybe it could happen again. Maybe, in fact, I'm finding over time, many of you might run your own businesses, and you might learn over one or two of those great days or one or two of those really tough days what you're best at, what your
Yeah.
design is.
Yeah.
And so maybe what aspects of your job description you can really lean into. And then the other ones that might be more challenging, and either you'd like to grow in those a little bit over time, or you'd like to delegate those to someone else if that's
Right.
possible.
Right.
And I think in the same way, it's not just that fit, of doing your best work, but even listening over time to feedback from others, or even asking for feedback from others
Mm.
on what was most helpful to them,
Mm.
or what they enjoyed the most,
Mm.
or even what was different in their experience with you than with someone else, and even asking yourself the same kinds of questions can start to give you a clear sense of how am I designed.
Yeah.
Right? Uh, am I a fish that's been trying to climb a tree?
Yeah.
And actually, the more I understand myself, I can actually give myself permission to say, God actually designed me to breathe underwater and swim with flippers,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And I
Yeah.
shouldn't try to keep climbing trees, even
Yeah.
though everybody else is climbing trees. I
Right.
can give myself permission to actually cooperate with my design
Yeah.
and be on. There are a lot of these avenues that I think start to open up just by listening to your own life.
Mm. Man, that's so helpful. That's exactly where I was. Like
Mhm.
feeling like I was constantly a failure because I was trying to do and be things that I wasn't,
Yeah.
and to prioritize things that weren't my strengths or passions. And so it's such a simple but profound step of just listening to your life, reflecting on those small experiences that we have every day, because they add up. They add up, and and like you said earlier, this is a continual process. And I feel like that
Mhm.
is the key to continual growth and clarity about our calling, and our fit, is to just continue listening to ourselves and continue soliciting that feedback. Even after going through the program myself, those have been some of the most valuable recurring activities that I've done with JP and with other people to just continue growing in this area. Um,
Definitely.
Man, well, Will, you guys have a podcast, the Vocationality Podcast, which also goes through these 5 steps, these 5 conversations, which is also really helpful if people are interested to hear more. Your
For
website is
sure.
vocationality.com. Are there any other resources that everybody should be aware of?
Well, I want to let you know we've got a couple new seasons of the podcast coming out soon. So
Awesome.
depending on when you're listening to watching this video, there may be a couple more seasons out. We've got one
Excellent.
coming up that is Harry Potter and the Secrets of Vocation.
That's
Uh,
awesome. I'm so
For
excited.
those of you who are Harry Potter fans and would love to think about your own work life in the context of some of those characters and stories. But we also have one that focuses on what you should follow when you think about your work life.
Hmm.
People give advice all the time, and it's usually really extreme. So I'll use one example. Some people say you should follow your passion when it comes to your work.
Yeah.
And other people say you should definitely not follow your passion when it comes to your work. So we'll talk about things like passion and heroes and gifts, energy, and things like that within that series as well.
Cool.
But we're planning to continue that podcast and articles as well. I want to give a little shout out here for a couple products that'll be released within the next month or so.
Oh, please
We're
do.
recording this in April during Corona season.
Yeah.
And we had
Right.
2 products coming out soon that are self-guided and that are week long.
Oh, awesome.
One is called How to Become Indispensable at Work.
Mm.
And for those of you who do work for someone else and you're wanting to hold on to your job or at least help your company to make it through this time, that's exactly what this program is designed to help you do. And in a very specific way, latching onto what you can bring to your company right now. The other one is called I Just Got Let Go, Now What? and millions of people across the U.S. that are experiencing that right now.
For
Who
sure.
knows how this is going to play out, even as COVID settles down.
For sure.
That can be a really troubling time if you've never been through it before. And this not only helps you to kind of emotionally work through this in a productive way, but also understand what is clear. Speaking of clarity, what is actually clear to me right now that's worth capturing, that can help me to move forward, and then what should I be doing next to begin moving forward? So it guides you through that process as well. Particularly if you've been affected by coronavirus, either wanting to hold on to your job or have lost your job, our hope is that these are for you.
Man, thank you so much. And all those will be available on your website, vocationality.com.
.com.
Great. Again, that's vocationality.com. Man, Will, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such a great conversation. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, really, about anything. So thanks.
It's a pleasure to talk to you too. I really appreciate being here.
Absolutely. Hopefully we could do this again sometime soon.
That would be wonderful.
All right, Will. Thanks so much.
Take care.
See ya.